Starting this year, Oregon State, Washington State, they're auditioning for bigger leagues, and they're not the only ones.
You are Locked On College Football, your daily podcast on all things college football. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Locked On College Football. I'm your host, Spencer McLaughlin. Thank you so much for making this your first listen or your first view every day. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day and your daily source to stay up to date with the biggest stories in the greatest sport on planet Earth, realignment, coaching carousel, the portal, and more. We've always got you covered. We'll check in on Kentucky and where they fit into the SEC landscape, and the college football playoff schedule is announced. I have many thoughts. I'll start, though, with Washington State and Oregon State and Boise State and Fresno State and San Diego State. I didn't even name all of them. Tulane could be in this conversation, that are beginning their auditions this year for the Big 12 or the ACC. You can wish realignment to go away as much as you like. It isn't going to, because we don't know where FSU and Clemson are going to end up. And then once the dust settles there, ESPN will have a decision to make by January of 2025 about whether to alter their contract with the ACC and whether that changes the calculus for anybody else and whether they would want to leave. And then in 2026, the Mountain West media rights deal expires. And around this time next year, conversations will have begun. They may already have gotten started on what the Pac-12 plans to do in terms of rebuilding its league, or do they want to go elsewhere? These are both options available. I think the Pac-12 is in wait-and-see mode. Just look at the ACC. How does it fall out? Where does everything shake out? Where do we stand? Okay. But if you operate under the assumption that Clemson and Florida State go to, let's just say, for instance, the Big Ten, and the ACC keeps everybody else around, continues to survive, if you are Oregon State, if you are Washington State, or any of the other schools I mentioned, or you never know who could be in the mix. South Florida? Memphis? Crazier things have happened. You have to think about every college football season and every college football game as a step-by-step audition for those bigger leagues. Because there could come a day, just from a sheer numbers standpoint. I know Stanford, Cal, and SMU are going to the ACC, and yeah, they would have a certain threshold of teams. Even if Florida State and Clemson depart, do you think there would be zero conversation, zero thought from the ACC and Commissioner Jim Phillips if FSU and Clemson leave and there's a big settlement and they get a bunch of money and they keep everybody else around? You think there's zero thought to adding more teams? If they feel that there is value, if they feel there's something that can be brought to the table, then yeah, leagues are going to explore those sorts of options. And I think Oregon State and Washington State, given their history in the Pac-12, are certainly going to be at the top of the list, at the top of everybody's minds. It doesn't mean they're the only ones there, because where the value is going to come in and where value is currently determined in many facets, though not all of them, I'll touch on that in a sec, is how competitive can you be in football? How do you strengthen our league to give us stability so that we can continue to operate as the most competitive league possible? Now, the ACC has had accusations levied against it that they have not factored in such things. They might change their mind if FSU and Clemson leave. Remember, part of Florida State's lawsuit against the ACC referenced Oregon State specifically and said, wait a minute, why are you adding these schools? It's because presidents vote on realignment. Why are you adding Stanford, Cal, and SMU when Oregon State's been a better program? I don't know why they didn't mention Washington State, also been a better program than those schools, but I digress. Oregon State has been the stronger of the two over the last couple of seasons, though Washington State has had its moments. Florida State said, you're ignoring this. The whole point of realignment is to strengthen our league, to make it better, not just to pursue television markets or name brand schools that you feel belong in the ACC. And Jim Phillips said, okay, well, good for you. We're adding them anyway because we feel like they add value. They're coming for very cheap. And SMU is also coming for even cheaper because, well, they just have deep pockets down there in Texas, of course. But if Jim Phillips, the commissioner of the ACC, were to alter course a little bit or read the tea leaves and say, hey, I do need to have the strongest league I can. I need to showcase our current members that loyalty to the ACC is going to be rewarded. A good way to do that is adding teams that bring some sort of value, if you can find that. It's difficult to find, albeit, but it's not impossible. Or you go find teams that strengthen your league. So if you think about this from those schools' standpoints, I think they're all vying for the attention. They're all trying to get the girl at the prom, and they're going to make the best promposals that they possibly can. This guy is going to set up a candlelit walk on the beach, and this guy over here is going to set up a creative, clever sign in front of everybody, and they get applause or whatnot. I don't know, like whatever floats your boat in that department. That's what these schools are doing, because these moves are not taking place next year. I don't think they're taking place the year after either. I think it's 2026. And so if you're Oregon State, Washington State, and you go through this Mountain West adjacent schedule, it's mostly Mountain West schedule, but they have other quality opponents on there, and you have, an 8-win season and a 10-win season, which I think either program is capable of, quite frankly. That's kind of the best pitch that you can make, isn't it? What if you have back-to-back double-digit win seasons? Remember, once upon a time, Utah was a member of the Mountain West and was elevated to the Pac-12. Why? Because they had a lot of success on the field. Yep, there were other factors. Geography, coming with Colorado, they're a Pac-12 fit culturally. Like, all of those things came into play. But do you think that move happens if Utah wasn't dominating over in the Mountain West, where they beat Alabama once upon a time in a Sugar Bowl? That's a thing that happened. That's a real college football. I know it sounds crazy. Those sorts of things matter. Those sorts of things stick with people. And you remember, hey, that's cool. Think about another school that recently was promoted from the Group of 5 to the Power 4 leagues. UCF. They have a season recently that anybody remembers. Do you think that helped? I'd be willing to bet my bottom dollar that it did. Cincinnati was undefeated in the Group of 5, went to the playoff. Do you think that helped their case? Do you think it did? Now, that's not automatic, because you could be BYU and have a big brand, or you could be Houston and be in a big city. And those can be factors that allow you to get an invite to a bigger league. But certainly Florida has got considerable market size, but Florida's not the biggest dog in that state. I mean, FAU's over there. They play in the American. They were in Conference USA previous. Why wasn't it FAU? Because UCF has shown they can compete at that sort of level. They can compete at a higher level. So over the next couple of seasons, all of these schools that have eyes on getting invites to the Big 12 or the ACC whenever they could be poised to add schools again, that's how you have to think about these seasons, is every opportunity, especially when you have a Power 4 opponent on the schedule, you look at that and say, man, this is a chance to showcase what we got. If we're playing a home game, showcase what it feels like to play in this stadium, what an environment looks like. We pull an upset, we're going to rush the field, and we're going to make it feel like big-time college football. That is what plays out this season and next season for any school that's at the Group of 5 and wants to make the jump. Let me know your thoughts in the YouTube comments, or hit me up on X, formerly known as Twitter. The SEC is very good. Hot take, I know. Is Kentucky very good? Are they good at all? We'll talk about that next. This episode is brought to you by our friends at eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience. The formula for winning championships is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. Superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time, or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to make your car the MVP and bring home huge wins. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit only available to U.S. customers. Is Kentucky just destined for the middle of the SEC? Chris Gordy, Locked On SEC, joining me to discuss. Let's start right there, Chris. This has been a really solid program over the last several years. They should be solid again, but are they ever going to be more than solid?
Well, I mean, the reality is this is a program that, very few people cared about. I happen to be married to a Kentucky grad, and, for years it was about, okay, we get excited for football season. After a couple losses, it's turned the page and on to basketball season. And that's kind of how it was for a long time until, 2018, Mark Stoops kind of takes them from 7-6 to 10-3. And I go, whoa, a 10-win season at Kentucky. We didn't think that was possible. And then, he has an 8-win season. COVID, you'll leave that one out. But then another 10-win season in 2021 and 4 straight bowl appearances. That's an accomplishment for Kentucky. And so, it's kind of, they've raised the standard there, but really the standard was if we're winning any games, we're excited, because that's how bad things had gotten under Joker Phillips. And, just the program had really bottomed out. So Mark Stoops really did a good job of making them relevant again. But, high hopes when you have your second 10-win season, expectations elevate. And these last 2 seasons have been, frankly, disappointing to go 7-6 with Will Levis, who came back for a second year, and then to have this past year with Devin Leary coming in, through the transfer portal. They were good, not great. And so that's what kind of led to these mediocre seasons. Now they still, again, like we said, got to bowl games, and that's an accomplishment within itself at Kentucky. But, are they ever going to be better than the 7 or 8 win season again? Can they get to that 10-win mark? And that's what people are hoping Brock Vandagriff will bring to this year.
I think it's a difficult proposition when you introduce Oklahoma and Texas into the mix. I think the big programs like having Texas and Oklahoma there because it's high-profile games, raise the standard in the conference. We can lose another game and still get into the playoff or pick up another high-quality win. I think programs like Kentucky or a team they play in week 2, South Carolina, are looking at Texas and Oklahoma and going, well, now we got to try and contend with that. Like, we were already having a hard enough time. It's not as if we can't do it, but now it's going to be just that much tougher because you have 2 programs in there that are going to expect to win, that are going to recruit at a high level, that are going to win games, and their fan bases will demand that they win, anywhere from 9 to 11 or 12 games in a given season. I worry about Kentucky because of what you said. Last 2 years, really, really high-end quarterbacks at the college level, whether you're talking more physical traits with Will Levis or Devin Leary, I think was one of the more highly sought-after transfers in the quarterback transfer cycle this past year. And it was just kind of like, it was fine. It wasn't bad, but it was just okay. So you then go to a guy who has attempted fewer than 25 passes in his career, Chris. That doesn't instill me with a lot of confidence in the Wildcats.
Yeah, well, and not only that, but you got to consider a guy who was, that they went out 2 seasons ago. They lose to Vanderbilt, and it was a tough loss for them. That was the weird stretch where Vanderbilt upset Anthony Richardson in Florida, who, by the way, Anthony Richardson goes, top 5 in the draft. But they also beat Kentucky that year. And there was a little running back named Ray Davis, who was a top 5 rusher at Vanderbilt. And Mark Stoops said, let's go get him. We need a feature back. They bring in Ray Davis to Kentucky, and he was a top 5 rusher in the SEC last year. Was highly productive, ended up getting drafted and all that. But they got to replace that production. I mean, they've had a nice run of running backs here at Kentucky. Benny Snell was very good. And, obviously with what Ray Davis did. So now they got to replace that. But they do have 2 of the better wide receivers in the entire SEC. Dane Key and Berrien Brown are both back, and they've been very productive wide receivers. Dane Key with over 600 yards and 6 touchdowns last year. Berrien Brown, dynamic return man on top of the 500 yards receiving he had. So, they're going to have weapons for Brock Vandagriff to throw the football to. It's just a matter of, okay, can we replace running back? The O-line is back and very good. Eli Cox is back for like his 6th year at center. They bring in Marcus Cox through the transfer portal. Dylan Ray, Jagger Burton's back. So it's a very seasoned, veteran-led offensive line, and that's going to be the strength. And then, defense is always pretty strong under Mark Stoops. That's his forte. And since he's been there, they've had a really, really strong defense, and it's led by Deion Walker, J.J. Weaver, a lot of these guys back on the D-line, Octavius Oxendine. So, I'm excited to see what they do. The schedule is pretty unforgiving. I mean, it doesn't allow for a lot of room for error, but, there were people that were saying, in the shadow of Carson Beck, that Brock Vandagriff was doing a really good job of learning and developing these last couple of years at Georgia on that depth chart. And so if Brock Vandagriff can live up to the hype, not saying he's going to be Carson Beck, because we all expect Carson Beck to be one of the best quarterbacks in the SEC this year. But if Vandagriff can be better than Leary was last year, I think Kentucky is primed to pull off an upset or two.
I think there is a solid foundation for Vandagriff to succeed, and it might just come down to him. It might just come down to how well do you adapt to the college game? How can you overcome, what essentially are going to be freshman mistakes, because he hasn't logged a whole heck of a lot of snaps. I think the front of this schedule is far more forgiving than the back end. I mean, there's Georgia in there, but the first 5 of the first 6 games are going to be played in Lexington for the Wildcats here. You have to think that that's a comfortable way for a guy who doesn't have really any starting experience or playing experience to work his way into college football. Southern Miss week 1 shouldn't have a problem. South Carolina week 2, I think that's the game where we're going to learn, because there's some pressure under Shane Beamer and that Gamecock staff to have a bounce back year. So I think that's a big game for both of these teams. But you're going to have plenty of urgency from South Carolina there. If Vandagriff looks good in that game, Chris, I think that's going to be a really good early season marker, because Southern Miss, how much can you really learn? Yeah, you can have takeaways, but can you draw conclusions? Probably not. Go up against South Carolina, and if he goes for 283 touchdowns and 1 interception and they win the game, I think that'll instill a lot of confidence in what Kentucky can do the rest of their season.
Yeah, and last year notwithstanding, I mean, Georgia was really good last year, and they put up 51 points on Kentucky. But prior to that, Kentucky's defenses were probably giving Georgia's the most fits of any team in the SEC. When you go look at points allowed, in 19 they held them to 21, in 20 they held them to 14, and 22 they held them to just 16 points. So Kentucky's defense, I don't know why, they just did a really good job against Georgia offensively. And yeah, you mentioned, I mean, all 3 of these games are at home for Kentucky at Kroger Field. The South Carolina game's already been announced as an afternoon game. But look, I look at Lenore Sellers coming in. They have high hopes for him at South Carolina, but he's a dual threat quarterback, but still no offensive line. That was the biggest problem with Spencer Rattler in the last 2 years. They couldn't protect for him. So, and they also don't have any weapons for him either. They lost Juice Wells. They lost Xavier Legette. So, I think that's a game that Kentucky can and should win in week 2. And you go into that Georgia game feeling like, yeah, we're underdogs. We're not supposed to win. But it's a night game at Kroger Field. The Kentucky fans are going to be fired up for that. And again, if the defense is playing lights out and they force a couple turnovers, we know Georgia's loaded, but who knows? You get a couple turnovers, maybe they can keep that one close and pull off an upset. But the good news is you get it out of the way, then you get Ohio, then you're at Ole Miss, and then you're home for Vanderbilt. I know everybody has high hopes for Ole Miss, but we don't know until we see it. Lane Kiffin has been great at playing with no expectations. What does Lane Kiffin do when he has expectations now at Ole Miss and everybody's expecting to be a playoff team? So I do think the home slate is doable. You get home games against Auburn and Louisville, obviously that rivalry game, but the road trips, I mean, like we said, at Ole Miss, at Florida, at Tennessee, and at Texas, those are all tough. But I will say, though, you mentioned Texas and Oklahoma coming in. Texas, this is their first experience of the grind of an SEC schedule. And, they get Florida home, then they're at Arkansas, then they get home against Kentucky before they go to A&M. This is one of those classic kind of trap games. I know it's at the end of the year, but maybe that's the game that Texas is caught going, we got Kentucky, no big deal. We're focused on the Aggies next week. That's where the SEC catches you off guard and pulls off an upset or two. Like I said, it happened to Kentucky 2 years ago against Vandy late. So, we'll see as the season gets going, but there's no doubt they have one of the tougher schedules, particularly road games in the conference. And so that's where I say if they can weather the storm, and I think 7-5 is probably the most realistic for Kentucky this year if everything goes well.
I think when you look at the schedule, between Georgia, Ole Miss, Tennessee, and Texas, only one of those games will be played in Lexington. If you win one of those games, as a furry feline friend makes a brief appearance here on the show for those watching on YouTube, if you find a way to win one of those games, I think that's surpassing expectations, because they'll be a pretty big dog, I think, in all of those contests. Chris Gordy, Locked On SEC. Check him out on YouTube and wherever you get your podcast. Chris, thanks as always.
Thanks, Spencer.
We've got a playoff schedule in this 12-team era. We'll talk about that next. 12-team college football playoff, which I'm not a fan of personally, though I admit there are intriguing, exciting elements to it, most notably home campus playoff games. I like that, but not too much else. If you ever want to debate with me about that, shoot me a note on Twitter. But the schedule goes something like this. You'll have a first-round playoff game on Friday, December 20th on ESPN. And ESPN, remember, is the sole media rights owner of the college football playoff, but they are subleasing some games to TNT, which I'm pretty down for. TNT has got a stellar broadcast crew. You could have some combination of Kevin Harlan, Ian Eagle, depending on what their NFL assignments are. I don't know how all that will work, but TNT's got a really, really good broadcast crew, or they have several great broadcast crews, so not opposed. But first game, Friday, December 20th. The next games are Saturday, December 21st, and then you get to the quarterfinals, which are Tuesday, December 31st, and then Wednesday, January 1st, New Year's Day, a tradition. You will have 3 playoff quarterfinal games on New Year's Day. Nothing wrong with that. The Tuesday thing, it's a little bit odd. The semifinals on Thursday, January 9th. The semifinals will have the second game played on Friday the 10th. And the national championship Monday, January 20th. Now, the latter part of that schedule indicates a desire from television networks, most likely, to avoid going up against the NFL. And that's something that gets tossed around every now and then in the context of college football and scheduling. Do you want to battle the NFL? Here's what I want you to ask yourself. If you ever see a conflict, and the NFL is playing games that weekend when the first round playoff games are taking place, if there's ever a conflict between college football and the NFL, the college football postseason and the NFL regular season, just ask yourself this question, especially if you're listening to or watching this show. Which one are you going to watch? And are you going to be able to watch it? Those are the only questions that should cross your mind. Well, they might not get as big of a rating if they go up against the NFL. And, I mean, like, what? That doesn't impact me. That doesn't impact you. Yeah, I want the sport to be popular. You know what I've noticed? College football doesn't have a popularity problem. That's not among the top 5 issues facing college football. Not enough people watch. There isn't enough money going around. No, that's not a problem that college football has. There aren't enough fans. No, they don't have that problem either. Just because you're not the NFL television-wise doesn't mean you need to make changes to improve yourself. Well, because you're behind. No, the NFL is just a different entity. That's just the way it goes. Fan base is often a lot larger in the NFL. They're often in larger metropolitan areas, though not always, of course. That shouldn't be what college football is trying to compare itself to. You shouldn't try to be the NFL. Be the best version of college football, whatever that looks like. Does that mean playing games on Tuesday and Thursday and Friday? Not particularly to me. But am I going to watch? Yeah, of course. Of course, I'm going to be watching all of those games. So I like that the first round games are going to be on campuses, or campi, if you will. If you know, you know. But, something that I thought about is that the early signing window has been moved. They moved it to accommodate the 12-team playoff. You know what they should have done with the early signing window? Just gotten rid of it. Just said, you know what, let's toss that aside. Let's just not have this December recruiting period. But instead, despite college football, this is why I just get so frustrated with the leaders that are making decisions in college football. Instead of utilizing the expanded playoff as an opportunity to just have signing day be in, February in the off season, they said, no, why don't we move it up even sooner? And it'll be the week after the regular season ends, just before conference championship games. Do you realize the insanity that goes into preparing for a conference championship game and having to finalize your recruiting class? Thinking about how the offense you're facing next week for a chance to get an automatic berth and a bye in the college football playoff, how they're going to attack you, and what your recruiting needs and roster desires are going to be for the following season. Doing that all in the same week, it doesn't make any sense. So many things about college football make very little sense. And as you can tell, especially my everydayers out there, who I very much appreciate, I love college football. I always have, I always will. Even if it is not the same as what it used to be, it obviously is not. I hope I don't have to explain that to you at this point. But when I look at these sorts of decisions, I'm just pulling out what little hair I actually keep on my head. Because I'm like, why? Think about it holistically. From a national standpoint, if you were trying to make college football more talked about, more discussed, grow the fan base, grow the interest, why would you jam off-season content into the middle of the season? There's a trade deadline in the NFL. The scale and importance and volume of moves made at a trade deadline in the professional leagues pale in comparison to an entire recruiting class. You're putting together almost an entire team's worth of guys. You're not adding 2 or 3 pieces to help you make a championship run. You're not making a trade for that relief pitcher who solidifies your bullpen, or going out to get a wide receiver to help your quarterback and you can make that push with him there and you're going to sign him to a deal. It's not like that. You're putting together so much time, effort, and energy, and you're making coaches whose staffs have grown as a product of this, I would hope, but still, I don't think it makes any sense. And if you're trying to maximize the attention, I see the numbers that this show does. It fluctuates throughout the year and depending on what's in the news cycle, but I know that recruiting, transfer portal, all of that stuff draws interest, draws intrigue. And yet, they're just passing on that opportunity. And even think about the transfer portal. Because if you want to make the argument, well, it's 2025 kids, they're not making an impact now on the roster. Like, you can think about it, you can separate. Okay. How about the national signing day and then the transfer portal window opening amidst the playoff run? Remember what happened? It didn't happen, thank goodness, because you don't wish injuries upon any player, of course. But Malik Murphy was the backup quarterback at Texas. When Quinn Ewers got hurt, he came in and started multiple games and won them for the Longhorns. They were playing in the national semifinal against Washington, and Arch Manning was their backup because Malik Murphy had transferred. Because if he didn't capitalize on an opportunity to go start at Duke, who I was talking about recently on the show, go check out yesterday's episode if you're interested. If he didn't capitalize on that opportunity there, he might not have been afforded that at all. So it's not great for coaches. It's not great for players. It's not great for fans. And it's not great for people who cover the sport because you're talking about things because they are newsworthy during a time in which they should not be a focal point of the news. So college football continues to baffle me with the scheduling decisions they make. I think home playoff games are going to be electric. Not going to argue that point. But still, we just keep moving through college football, and the calendar makes less and less sense all the time. If I sound like old man yelling at the sky, sue me. That's the way I feel. Appreciate everyone listening. I'll see you next time, and until then, hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.